I still remember the exact moment my husband ended our 27-year marriage, like it meant absolutely nothing to him. We were sitting in our kitchen in San Diego. It was a completely normal Tuesday morning. The sun was coming through the window, the coffee maker was humming, and everything felt entirely ordinary. It was the place where we had celebrated birthdays, marked anniversaries, and spent quiet Sunday mornings for nearly 3 decades. Robert did not even look nervous. He folded his hands on the table and said almost casually, "Mary, I am leaving you." Then he added something that hurt even more. "There is someone else. She is younger. She actually wants something out of life." For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood him. You know, when someone says something so cruel, so entirely absurd, that your mind just refuses to accept it. That was me. I just stared at him. I was waiting for guilt. I was waiting for regret. I wanted to see shame on his face, anything, but there was nothing. Robert had already made up his mind long before that conversation ever happened. I just hadn't realized I was the last one to know. And look, I thought the worst part was the betrayal. I thought the worst thing that could happen to a woman was being abandoned after giving someone the best years of her life. I had no idea the real shock was still coming. I didn't know it at the time, but the man walking out on me believed he was leaving behind a powerless, ordinary woman. He had absolutely no idea that I was about to become a $2 billion headline. If you've ever had someone treat your love like it was disposable, then you'll understand why this story matters. Robert did not raise his voice. That is what made it so much worse. He said it the same way someone might mention they were changing jobs. "This marriage hasn't worked for a long time," he said, rubbing his temple like I was just an inconvenience. I remember asking him what he was talking about, because I needed to hear him explain how 27 years could be reduced to one cold sentence. Then he said it again. "There is someone else." My stomach dropped. I asked how old she was. He hesitated, and that told me everything. "She is 24. I was 54. You're not ready for what comes next, because somehow that wasn't even the most insulting part. The most insulting part was what he said after. "She has ambition, Mary. She wants something bigger out of life." Let me explain something. I had supported Robert through law school, through the early years when money was tight, through nights when we didn't know how we were going to cover the mortgage. Back then, my lack of ambition wasn't a problem. Back then, I was exactly the kind of wife he needed. And what I didn't understand back then was that some people don't rewrite history because they forgot. They rewrite it because it helps them justify what they're about to do. He told me she was an influencer. I actually thought I might laugh. Travel, fashion, lifestyle content. He said it like he was announcing a merger. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Pay attention to this detail because it's going to matter later. The divorce papers were already prepared. He hadn't come to talk. He had come to execute a plan. I opened the folder and started reading. Property division, asset disclosures, settlement terms. The more I read, the colder I felt. The house was in his name through some legal entity. Most of the investments were connected to his firm. Even the retirement funds were arranged in ways that made them hard to divide. By the time I got to the end, one thing was obvious. Robert wasn't just leaving me. He was leaving me with almost nothing. He called it fair. Honestly, that word made me feel sick. "You'll be fine," he said. "You always live simply anyway." That one hit harder than I expected, because it was true. I did live simply. I never cared much about status. For most of our marriage, I believed that balance made us stronger. Sitting there with those papers, I started to wonder if he had always seen my peace as weakness. Then he stood up and said one more thing. "You'll probably see Chloe on social media soon. I'd appreciate it if you handled this like an adult." And that's when everything fell apart. The house went quiet after he left. Too quiet. I sat there at the kitchen table staring at the papers, trying to understand how a life could still look the same while already being over. The next morning, my friend Laura called me. "Please tell me you're sitting down." She told me to check Instagram. And there he was, Robert, on a rooftop terrace holding a glass of champagne, standing next to a 24-year-old with the kind of smile people practice in mirrors. The caption said, "New beginnings with my favorite person." I kept scrolling. Luxury restaurants, beach views, designer stores. Then I saw a photo of them in front of a sleek building downtown with a caption celebrating her new home. And look, I recognized the building, one of the most expensive luxury towers in San Diego. Laura did some research and told me Robert had bought that penthouse 2 months earlier. 2 months. That meant while we were still eating dinner together, he had already bought another home for another woman. Wait, it gets worse. That afternoon, a courier delivered more legal documents from Robert's lawyers, formal filings, another settlement proposal. He had structured everything carefully because he believed I had no leverage. He believed I couldn't fight back. He believed I would quietly accept whatever was offered because I was just the nice wife who didn't understand finances. He was wrong, just not in the way either of us realized yet. A few hours later, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Mary Johnson, this is Thomas Reynolds. I handled estate planning for your father, Edward Bennett. We need to speak as soon as possible." At first, I almost ignored it. My father had been dead for over 20 years. I assumed it was some routine issue. Let me explain why that made sense. As far as I knew, my father had been a careful investor who left me a modest trust. It provided regular payments, enough to live comfortably, but nothing extraordinary. Robert used to complain about that. He'd say, "Your father must have had more money than that." I always assumed Dad had just been conservative. So when Thomas Reynolds asked to meet, I figured it was paperwork. The next morning, I met Thomas in a quiet conference room. He was older, polished, the kind of man who didn't waste words. He put a folder with my name on it in front of me and said, "Before we begin, I want you to understand that your father loved you very much." That caught me off guard. Then he said, "Everything he did financially was designed to protect you." Protect me from what? That's what I asked him. He opened the folder and slid a document across the table. It was part of my father's trust agreement. I told Thomas I already knew about the trust, the monthly payments. He nodded and said, "Yes, that's the portion of the trust you were meant to know about." My heart started racing. There was more, a lot more. Thomas explained that what I'd been receiving was only a small part of a much larger structure. My father hadn't just been an investor. He had founded a private investment company called Bennett Holdings over 40 years earlier. It quietly acquired stakes in tech, medical research, and real estate. Then Thomas handed me current financial summaries. I looked at the numbers once, then again. I thought there had to be a mistake. There wasn't. Bennett Holdings was worth just over $2 billion. You know what surprised me the most? It wasn't even the number. It was the realization that my father had kept this secret from me on purpose. I asked Thomas why. He told me my father believed sudden wealth distorts people. He wanted me to live normally. He wanted me to build a life that wasn't shaped by money. Then he showed me the part that changed everything. The trust had activation clauses. Full control of Bennett Holdings would transfer to me under 2 conditions: if my husband died, or if my marriage legally ended. I just stared at him. Let that sink in. As long as I was married, I only received those limited payments. But once my divorce was finalized, I would become the controlling beneficiary of Bennett Holdings, full legal control. $2 billion. And this is where the story gets heavy, because Thomas slid one more thing across the table. A letter. In my father's handwriting. On the front it said, "For Mary, if her marriage ends." My hands were shaking when I opened it. My father wrote that no father wants to imagine his daughter experiencing heartbreak, but that money reveals truths that stay hidden. He said when he first met Robert, he saw intelligence, but also a man who measured value strictly through success and status. He wrote that he did not oppose my marriage because he believed people can grow, but he also believed it was his responsibility to protect me if that growth never happened. He said the assets were never meant to control my life. They were meant to give me freedom if I ever needed it. And then he wrote the line that stayed with me. No one should ever be allowed to use your kindness or your patience as a weakness. I had to stop reading for a minute. My eyes blurred. Thomas just sat there and let me have the moment. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the exact second my heartbreak started turning into clarity. The divorce still had to be finalized. Until then, Robert knew nothing. Thomas made that clear. Legally, the trust was separate, protected from marital claims. My father had thought 10 steps ahead. He had protected the company. And me. I walked out of that office carrying a letter from my dead father and the knowledge that my entire life was not what I thought it was. I wish I could tell you I immediately felt powerful. I didn't. I felt stunned. I sat in my car for a long time, just staring at the steering wheel. But underneath all of that, there was relief. Because for the first time since Robert handed me those papers, I understood one critical thing. He had miscalculated. A few days later, I met Daniel Brooks, the managing director of Bennett Holdings. He had been running things since my father died. He walked me through the portfolio and the strategy. I felt out of my depth, but Daniel said I didn't need to become someone else overnight. I could learn. That mattered more than he realized. 3 weeks later, my divorce became official. No dramatic courtroom scene, just a quiet hearing. 27 years ended in less than 20 minutes. Robert didn't even look at me. To him, this was a win. Clean exit, young girlfriend, new chapter. But outside the courtroom, Thomas was waiting. He handed me the final documents and said, "Technically speaking, it's already happening." We got into his car and he showed me the balance line on his phone. There it was, over $2 billion. I felt empty for about 10 seconds. Then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd I didn't know what else to do. That same afternoon, I went back to the house one last time. Chloe was there directing movers. Robert came out and we had a very polite, calm conversation about scheduling. He had no idea what had happened just hours earlier. 3 days later, the news broke. I was sitting in a small rental apartment near the coast when my phone started vibrating non-stop. Laura called me and said, "Turn on the news." The headline was staring back at me. Mary Johnson takes control of $2 billion investment empire. My photo was attached. The article laid everything out. Bennett Holdings, the trust, the transfer of control. Then Robert called. His voice was completely different. Gone was the smug certainty. "What is this?" he asked. I answered calmly. "What is what?" "I'm looking at an article that says you own Bennett Holdings." "Yes." He went quiet. Then he asked the most ridiculous question. "Why didn't you tell me?" Tell him what? The thing I hadn't known myself until after he filed for divorce? Then it hit him, really hit him. The trust activated because the marriage ended. If we had still been married, he would have had legal access through our marital status, proximity, influence. Instead, he had walked away 2 weeks too early. His voice turned hollow. "You're saying I just walked away from $2 billion? I didn't answer. He asked to meet. I said no. He called again the next morning. And the next conversation told me everything about who he really was. He said maybe we rushed the divorce. He said maybe we should look at everything again. Then, when that didn't work, he tried regret. I made a mistake, he said. Here's the thing. He wasn't sorry because he left me. He was sorry because he found out what he left. A little later, I found out Chloe had moved out too. Apparently, she didn't enjoy being part of a story where the man she chose had just divorced a billionaire. Then Chloe reached out to me. Curiosity won, and I met her. Without the filters, she looked nervous. She told me she didn't know about the money. I believed her. Then she told me why she really wanted to meet. She said Robert left because he truly believed I had nothing. He thought leaving me proved he deserved more. Then she showed me messages from him. He was already planning another legal attempt, telling people I had hidden assets from him. I wasn't even angry. I was tired, because by then I understood him. Robert didn't know how to lose. He couldn't accept that the woman he dismissed as ordinary was the one holding the future. I forwarded everything to Thomas. He replied, "Do not worry. This is exactly what we expected." My father had expected all of it. The greed, the scrambling. He had built the trust not just to preserve wealth, but to reveal character. 6 months later, my life looked nothing like it had before. I didn't start living like a public billionaire stereotype. I became more deliberate. I started taking an active role in the company, and slowly I found purpose. My father hadn't built the company as a monument to money. He built it as a tool to fund research and real impact. One of the first things I pushed for was a creative education foundation. I thought about the kids in my art classes, the ones who felt invisible until someone gave them a place to create. That meant more to me than any headline. And then, one day, I ran into Robert at a grocery store. No courtroom, just the almond milk aisle. He looked tired. He asked how I was. He said he had seen the articles about the research facility we were funding. Then he said, "I guess this is the part where I tell you I was wrong." And for once, I believed him. Not because he had transformed, but because consequences had finally reached him. His firm was under pressure. His reputation was hit. Chloe was gone. He was the man who divorced a billionaire 2 weeks too early. That was his legacy. He told me he spent his whole life thinking winning meant having more than everyone else. Now he was learning that winning means not losing what you already have. I realized I didn't hate him anymore. I just understood him. And sometimes understanding someone is the final step before you finally let them go. If this story hit you in some way, leave a like. Seriously, it helps me more than you know to keep bringing these stories to you. Tell me in the comments, if you found out someone only valued you because of what they thought you didn't have, what would you do? Would you try to prove something to them, or walk away and build a life they no longer have access to? I read every comment. So if you've lived through betrayal, divorce, or that moment when heartbreak turns into clarity, I want to hear your story. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. If you made it this far, subscribe to the channel. Every week there's a new story, and some of them get even wilder than this one. Thanks for being here with me.